Hello, my name is Alex Cody, and you're watching the making of for my short film Feels Real. Uh, this is just kind of me talking a little bit about the process of making this short film and just each of the little things that went into it. First of all, I want to thank Sky and Andromeda for hosting the Creation Jam 2023. I wouldn't have known about it had Andromeda not posted about it. And again, I thank Sky for organizing the event. The event itself was basically just this sort of outreach for different artists from whoever could see the event happening to participate in making a creative project for their Itch.io website. So primarily, I guess, there's encouragement to make a game, but it could be to make music or make visual art or do a short film. And the theme was around derealization. So I'll start off talking about when I first started to shoot footage for this film. At the time, I was in Switzerland in my vacation home. I started filming as soon as the theme was announced, that being derealization. And when this was updated, I had woken up randomly early at my time, like around 6 or like 5 something. One of the key terms was talking about things were foggy, sort of dreamlike, they're a bit like hazy. And so I was feeling like that time of day was sort of reflective of that, or just looked, kind of, hazy like that. And I had just come out of a dream that, in spite of every kind of logical fallacy that it had, I was convinced that it was my life until I woke up. So I, with that in mind, just started to shoot some shots. I just put up the iPad against a chair that was next to my bed and started filming myself in bed in shots that seemed appropriate for a shot of me in bed. Then stuff around the room and stuff in my childhood room. I guess sort of having it in mind that these were things that I've seen so much in my life, like just over and over again, that they become easy to take for granted as being part of my reality. So I guess there was just sort of a lot of unconscious sort of understanding of like what it was I was shooting and what I was filming for, but really I can't tell you that a lot of this footage wasn't just like random and just sort of fingers crossed, hoping it would work or go along with what I was doing. Once I understood what the theme was, there wasn't really much of a storyboard per se, or really much of a script. The most it got into was just understanding that I had shots of this very particular time of early morning, and so I decided to have other times that I would film it. So it became, starting off with dawn, getting into dusk, nighttime footage, and then daytime footage. That was the only real kind of strict, like, architecture of this project that I was working with. As far as what specifically I was shooting in these particular moments, it was fairly random. I guess really initially when it came to the early morning stuff, I wanted it to be kind of dreamlike, a bit hazy, a bit floaty. And then as we got into dusk, I wanted the mood to kind of shift into being somewhat darker, a little bit more serious, more ethereal in a way. And obviously nighttime wanted it to be scary, but then I wanted to say fuck that and just shift the tone once we get into the daytime. Because I just didn't want this whole thing to just be like a really super serious, dark thing, as much as most of it kind of is. Filming with the iPad was fun because it meant that then you could have some interesting angles when you have to hold it somewhere, sometimes you want a still shot, and even something like this is just resting against the wall behind you. Like, I had to, just test it out and see how it looks, and then we go from there. And that's kind of a lot of these shots is like that. But there was some shots that I filmed on my own and did a similar, like, leaning against something. Some of my favorite shots were with leaning against the axe on the bit of log that I was chopping at. My other favorite shots is one where you're leaning it against something on the upper level of the barn that I'm in, so I get that top-down shot. Other shots were done with the help of my sister and my brother-in-law. Especially any of the stuff that has, me in front of the camera in a way that's just like would be tricky to find something to lean the iPad against to get a proper shot of and things like that. There wasn't really much of a plan going into each segment. Like when it came to filming things, it wasn't really knowing that was exactly what I wanted to film, except for the nighttime stuff, where I knew I wanted there to be some shots on the railroad tracks. I wasn't entirely sure what, but I just knew I wanted some footage, so I just did whatever came to mind, whatever seemed creepy or kind of unusual or not quite right, I suppose. And the stuff in the cellar, I wanted some horror element in there that's a little bit familiar. I liked the found footage look that it had to it and things like that, and so I decided I wanted there to be live out the fear of something, this creepy environment definitely has something in there, and oh my god, it's me. That was the only thing that was a real at the time of shooting footage was anything where I'm okay, that's in my head and I want to get that on a film. I learned a lot about the logistics of trying to carry out something that you envision, and it's not so simple as just pointing the camera at a thing and then expecting the thing to come out like that. It's you have to do a lot of trial and error, and you have to work with their means, and there's also learning about the windows of time I was giving myself, and having to work with in order to keep up with these different acts and things like that. One of my favorite things was the use of lights in the nighttime segments. Some shots just use whatever light is in the shot, but there are other times where obviously there's a light flashing on my face, or some of the interior shots are done. Some of the shots walking around found footage style. I have my flashlight, just my phone flashlight, and I'm holding the phone along with the iPad. One of my favorite things was when we had the shot of me in front of the log turning around to face the face in the hole in the wall. We had a flashlight that had this magnetic sort of attachment onto it, and we just popped it onto the back bit of the bike that's actually in the shot, you could see, and I put the flashlight on there and it just held on with the magnet, and so that was sort of our own little spotlight to kind of put there at the perfect spot for it to shine on my face and on my head and such. Starting to play around with things like that, and learning about the importance of lighting in general and how that can kind of make or break your shot, or even being able to see what you're filming. We had a whole night where we weren't understanding that it was in nighttime mode, so then the brightness on the iPad was all the way down, so we were wondering why we couldn't see anything when we were trying to film in the cellar. I probably could have done a bit more to have the daytime feel more of a sharp shift in the tone, maybe have more energy to it, make it more fun. It still ends up feeling a little bittersweet or melancholic, but some of the shots were my last day there, so maybe there was some bittersweet feelings around it anyways. But no, there wasn't any strict terms or things that I wanted to shoot. Some things came up as soon as I got into writing something out. After about a day or two of filming, then came the writing portion of it. I needed something to kind of help sort of put some more meat onto these bones that I had for the story. And so I got my mind working a little bit on things like, what are the differences between what makes a dream and what makes reality? How do we justify what either of those are? Or what evidence do we use to suggest something is a dream or something is reality? How is it that we can understand that we're in a dream and understand that we're in reality? What does it mean? What does it mean when we talk about reality? Do we not have our own sort of versions of reality? Is there a universal reality? The sort of relationships between the unconscious and the conscious mind, and perception of things, our own perception, how easily we can think one thing is happening when really something different is happening. Is that a shift in reality? Is that what we call this fantasy or dream versus a reality? just kind of exploring loosely these things. And this writing kind of helped to pick up on certain imagery that I was having either intentionally or unintentionally, seeking out some like kind of things. It was interesting to unpack that. And I can't really say that it did this quite the same thing as like having a script or again like a storyboard. All this really is just a very overt text for the theme. The writing itself is pretty much first draft. Like aside from stuff that I cut out from the movie itself, it's just the first thing that I wrote out in relevance to these acts. Like it's separated into each act. Has its own like just page written out. I think that's kind of the limitation I gave myself, is I just fill up the page until I can't anymore and just end it at the end of the page. I guess it's a hard balance to find between having too little to say and having too much to say about the topic. I don't know if having more words would have helped the experience. Maybe some more relevant dialogue or some sort of like kind of more clear kind of direction that it's going, and otherwise again it just kind of sounds like shower thoughts. But it's another kind of element on its own that can't really be realized without it being in coupling with all the other elements in the film. That's where the editing comes in. I will admit that filming and editing something isn't exactly like something I'm completely unfamiliar with. I did plenty of that in high school for like class projects and stuff, and I always thought they were so much fun. I never really wanted to take them seriously, so it was a lot of fun to basically just make funny little videos and try to be entertaining with them. I think I've had a strong skill already in editing in those projects, and so I understood that the editing process was going to be a bit like not easier, I would say, but just I could have more confidence in knowing that everything will lead up to the editing. Like whatever lack of confidence I have in my filming tech capabilities, or even in my capabilities of writing out narration to say, even having the narration actually be said by like me, all of those concerns and doubts that I have around those things can be assuaded in the editing process, because I'm already aware that a lot can happen in the editing process. Like really, I would say that in this particular short film, so much of it is made in the editing. I was tempted to just use iMovie on the iPad initially for editing, but the thing kept crashing and there was just too much footage to try and like do it all with like finger touch, drag and drop, just nightmare. So I was encouraged to do a free trial for Adobe Premiere Pro, and at first it was pretty daunting and I wanted to cry and I didn't want to keep doing anything. And then I tried to open up iMovie on an old Mac laptop that I have, but that bitch is so old that it won't even run iMovie. So I had no choice but to try and figure out Adobe Premiere Pro within like a week that I had left. Maybe less than a week actually that I had left to edit the thing. As time went along and as the project was filling up a bit more, there's some intention developing with the shots and like what exactly I wanted to do. I started to edit loosely some of the footage I had on iMovie, and I was starting to notice sort of like incorporated or like parallel imagery, some like kind of incorporated symbols or just like elements that were popping up more than once, whether intentionally or not. There was stuff like with the hands. Even the footage of things that are upside down was just an accidental realization that, when I'm filming and I flip the camera around, the image turns upside down, and for some reason I wasn't anticipating this, so it was a pleasant surprise when I saw this in my collection of footage. So I was like, oh, let me do some more shots like that. Or let me like digitally just flip the image, like in the editing bay. That was pretty fun, like having more of this drive, like okay, like I know I need some more footage for this time, like what I have just isn't really like feeling right, like in the timeline. The editing process really highlighted like some clarity in imagery and in associations between the narration, the visuals, and even the music. The music and the editing process kind of went hand in hand, where there was still a missing that missing element there. It's really made me to tighten up, you know, when this footage begins and when does it end, when does it move on to the next clip. And the timing of it and when to cut and all those things, it starts off being just kind of an instinct, just sort of what feels right as I'm watching it, but it doesn't get fully realized until the music is there and until the narration is there. So once I got to the editing and I had the basic sort of timeline figured out there and the basic kind of timing of the clips put out there, then I started to make the music alongside with the footage. That was a pretty fun process. I'm also not unfamiliar with making music, but this is the first time of making a soundtrack to anything, let alone like a soundtrack to my own stuff. And it was my first time making music properly, like on my own with the GarageBand app on iPad. I have a friend who does his music a lot with that, and I find it quite intuitive with the keyboard and how it's a lot of fun to do things like have like the pitch sort of fluctuate along with where you drag your finger, or how you can kind of edit as or how you can manipulate the knobs and such, like while you're holding notes onto the synthesizer and things. It was very intuitive to use for this particular project, and I had a lot of fun making this soundtrack for sure. This was also done in just a night, which again probably could have some room for improvement, but I think it's good for what it is. The music was one of the last things that was made for the project. I started out using the iPad with GarageBand on there, and I would watch what I had edited at that point, and then I started to make the tracks along with what I was seeing, just to kind of get an idea about where something would start and where the song would end. And once I understood where those points were, then I worked with whatever was in between, kind of filling it out with instruments incidental of the film, just working on the songs. And there was all one continuous song file, so that's why there's a lot of sustained instruments kind of carrying over from one thing to another, because otherwise then the song would just loop back into itself. So I repeated this process of starting to make a song while watching the footage and then finishing it up outside of the footage. And then once I had the whole thing just kind of laid out there, then I popped it onto the timeline and the editing started to become even better. Like it started to be clear where I wanted to make the cuts, where things were going to play out and all that kind of stuff. And then the narration that was recorded also on GarageBand with the little Apple earbud mic. That's why you probably hear like cactus rustling against the mic. If you watched the short film, and that's why you're watching this video, then I hope you liked it. Thanks for giving it a shot. And if you want to see more, let me know. I'd be happy to make some more stuff. Thank you again, Sky and Andromeda, for the Creation Jam. And I hope that there will be another one. And I hope that all the other contestants are happy with their work.